Stay hydrated. Oh, God.
Terranigma is a game that you've never heard of if you grew up in the United States like I did in the 80s and 90s, and I know you've never heard of it because my good pal Thomas Jenkins never heard of it, and if he's never heard of it, I know you haven't either. Now, you might have played its predecessor though, Illusion of Gaia, but probably not because as far as I know, not many people played that either, but whatever, that has nothing to do with this, so let's keep it out of here and let's not get distracted as I want to do in many of my videos. I played it though, it was good, check it out, but back on track, seriously. You never played or heard of this one because it never came out in North America. There, I said it, the cat's out of the bag. It did come out in Japan, Europe, and Australia though, which means it did get an official English translation. However, it's not a very good one, but it is charming in a certain way and sometimes hilariously racist, which I enjoy, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But how come those of us in the West never got it, and more importantly, is it worth playing? Look, I'm gonna let the intro play, but when I get back, we're gonna talk about this one. I'm gonna tell you now though, it's a good game, which I love telling you at the very beginning if it's good or not to just spoil the entire review and make it worthless. And it is worth playing, but the enjoyment you'll get out of it depends on your tolerance for some straight up 90s era bullshit and jank, which also happens to be the name of my solo jazz album I put out 30 years ago.
Now look, it's no conspiracy that this game wasn't released in North America. I can tell you why. It was developed and published by Enix, and this was before Squaresoft bought them. And they closed all of their studios in America, so the only ones they still had available to release this in English were in Europe and in Australia. So they translated the game, released it there. And for some reason, they were never able to re-release the game again due to copyright issues. I'm not sure what they were. I'm assuming because they had manga artists like working on this game. There were some royalty issues they didn't feel like addressing, so they just said, fuck it. That's fine, and whatever. And look, the only version of this in English that you can play is the PAL version, so it's 50 frames per second. That sucks. You can download a patch, probably from romhacking.net, apply it to the game, play the game in 60 frames per second the way that God intended, do it that way. Who cares? It doesn't matter. On to the review. Thanks for being here. I love you guys. Have sex with it. Have sex with it. Have sex with it. Have sex with it. It.
And if you've ever played an action RPG, you know, like the kind of game where you actually attack enemies as they appear in the world like Zelda instead of random battles like in older Final Fantasies, you know what you're getting into here because that's what this game is. I always like games like this, although I do enjoy random battles too, so it's whatever, I've got no preference, and it's stupid I even brought it up, but I do kind of miss random battles like in the newer Final Fantasy 16. I played through that bad boy and I kept wondering to myself if I would have liked it more if the battles were just random and turn-based, but let's stay on track here. I did really like Final Fantasy 16 though, I'm not knocking it in any way. With Terranigma, it's pretty straightforward. You've got a sword, a jump, a dash, and some items including bullshit magic. You'll probably want to reassign the buttons though and get dash on the R button, but you do you. You can use magic rings and pins, but they suck and aren't really worth mentioning, or even using for that matter, unless you're fighting something that absolutely requires it. Like there's one boss where you need to use a certain ring, and that boss is named Bloody Mary, and that boss I'll be talking about later because it's when you reach her you realize this game can really dish out some straight ass in order to artificially make it longer, and I'd advise you to cheat in order to finish the game off at this point. I'll talk about this later, but I digress. Back on topic, as I said, these rings are essentially magic and I found it to be pretty worthless. You might like it if you're an asshole though, and the amount of times you can use this magic depends on how many of these magi rocks you find in the world. There's quite a few of them, but the amount of these you have is the amount of any magic rings or pins you can buy and equip, and they are one-use items. I found a huge majority of the magi rocks, but it doesn't really matter because fuck magic, bro. Other staples that you're probably used to if you've ever stopped watching TikTok videos long enough to play a video game in your entire pathetic life is a leveling up system based on experience points gained in battle, and for the layman's here, leveling up entails raising your stats like health and strength and defense, etc. Not much to it there. You can also find items and armor and weapons in the world or buy them in shops, which upgrade your character. Nothing much to it, but what does really grind my goat though is this ludicrous inventory screen you access by hitting the select button. Instead of a standard menu, which would be easy and sensible to navigate, you get this crazy bullshit that is head-scratchingly ridiculous, but Jesus Christ man, what the hell were the developers thinking when they thought this would be a good idea? Like, what's wrong with this right here? Just because something is simple doesn't mean it isn't effective. But instead we get like this crazy door system and a dressing room set. I don't know, who cares? This is a minor complaint. It's not a huge deal, but it is worth mentioning because every time I had to use this menu, I thought to myself, why does this exist? You hardly spend any time in the menus though, so whatever, moving on.
Love.
Let's talk about the story a bit here. You wake up in bed getting bitched at by your girlfriend, which starting any RPG getting bitched at to get out of bed by someone is pretty much par for the course for any RPG ever made. You wake up presumably super horny and angry because your hot-ass GF is being a bitch. This is kind of where you get your first dose of bullshit from this game, and you begin to figure out pretty early that this one is going to do its best to not tell you a single thing you need to know in order to progress through the story, and it sure as hell won't do a single thing to help you understand what is possible and what is not regarding gameplay and interacting with your surroundings. If this sounds like fun to you, stop watching this video and get on eBay to buy this immediately for your own Super Nintendo. It sounds like I'm angry, and I am, but this won't ruin the game, but be prepared to have a walkthrough pulled up on your phone or whatever every second you play this game because you are going to need it. I'm going to struggle explaining this story to you because holy shit is it convoluted as hell, but I will do my best and I'm going to tell you it as I interpreted it. I'm not looking anything up, so let's do this. Alright, let's see here. So you wake up, obviously, and you're a guy named Ark. And yes, you can rename him, and yes, I renamed him Piss because I'm a child. And you wake up in this weird mansion in this weird city called Krista that's located in an underworld beneath the surface of the actual Earth that we live on in the real world. The surface is ruined, but the underworld isn't. And somehow there's light down there. I don't know. There's a random door in this mansion that some guys want to open, but the elder told you not to, but never gave you a reason why. They then pry it open, and then they get sucked into it. You gotta figure out what to do. I mean, this is a problem. And this is when you realize this game is going to be so full of shit through the entire playthrough, so it takes about 5 minutes of gameplay before you get completely stuck. I'm not saying it's a bad game, but I am saying it is cryptic as hell regarding what you're supposed to be doing ever, and you will need to have a walkthrough open at all times, unless you just love wasting your time trying to figure out the most inane bullshit you're supposed to be doing, or like how to do it. Look, I'll try to stay on track here. All I'm saying is you'll be wandering around forever not knowing what the fuck to do a lot. So here, after these guys get sucked off into oblivion, you gotta pick up random vases or vases and containers and throw them at this blue door. This cracks it, then destroys it. Then the actual story begins. There's no way in absolute hell I would have ever thought about doing this, as there's no indication to me whatsoever that you could interact with the environment like this, and it's actually maybe the only time in the game that you can. I actually think it is. I guess maybe the game tries to nudge you in the right direction as a cook asks you for a container earlier, and when you throw it at her, since there's no way to set it down, she flips out, but that does not do enough to indicate that you can interact with the world in this way, so that was stupid. Moving on. Once you break the door down, you get ambushed by some tadpole that Ark, aka Piss, as I renamed him, just allows to follow him around without asking any questions, and this dude shows you how to actually use the batshit stupid menu system I bitched about earlier. You seriously need an entire tutorial on how to use a menu screen, so that goes to show you how much of a good idea it was to design it that way. Now it turns out everyone in your village is frozen except for the elder, and he tells you need to go to 5 towers in order to prove how much of a man you are. Each tower mostly serves as a tutorial on each aspect of the game you'll need to learn in order to proceed. Like, for example, one tower is basically all about jumping and platforming, while another is all about combat. You get the idea. These are all fairly basic and can be beaten in like 10 or so minutes each. There is a little fun side note I should mention though, just so you understand that when I tell you to use a walkthrough, I need you to believe me. You need a guide with you at all times when you play this, unless you want to waste hours of your life running in circles. So here's my example. When you arrive at the second tower, the game lets you play through the entire thing for like 10 minutes without any indication that at the end of it, you'll find out you need an ice ring to flip an otherwise inaccessible switch in order to proceed towards the exit. So now you get to go all the way back to the tower again, fighting enemies and getting your butthole wrecked, then go back to your village, buy this ring and equip it, then you get to go all the way back through the tower again, fighting all the enemies again and getting your butthole ruined again just to use this stupid ice ring to hit a switch to exit the tower. Really good stuff, guys. Thank you, Enix, for doing this and respecting my time. Anyway, look, it's a minor gripe. Again, 90s games are notorious for this kind of shit to make the game seem longer. I'm just gonna tell you this one more time and then I'll never bring it up again. Use a guide and you can actually enjoy this game by avoiding pitfalls like these. If you don't use a guide and you're mad all the time like I was, that's all your fault. Anyway, this is your standard save the world stuff here. Eventually you jump into a pit that the Elder just tells you to jump into, and it somehow puts you on the surface of the planet, which doesn't make any sense since you're underneath the surface, but who cares? There's basically standard dungeons you need to clear to restore all the animals and the humans. Each dungeon is responsible for a certain aspect, like one will restore plant life, one restores wildlife like lions, another restores birds. You get the picture. It's a classic Super Nintendo style RPG. There's not a ton of substance here concerning the story. I will talk more about it a little later, but for now, let's talk about the game design, music, gameplay, and what works and what doesn't. Let's talk about the good first, and then we can end the video on a negative note by talking about the bad last. The way it should be, right? Like, first, things I like.
I'm not afraid anymore!
Okay, and to start off here, let's just say this is a different recording session here. I got too drunk to finish the last one, but starting off with things I like. The music is great. It's some of the best I've heard on the Super Nintendo. I could play some clips for you here, but I won't. I've been playing the music in the background of this review. You've heard enough to get it. Second, the pixel art here is top notch. I'm not sure if there's any helper chips at work here in the cartridge, since this is a later Super Nintendo game, but Terranigma looks fantastic. It's one of the best looking games for the console, and if I had to compare it graphically with something else, I would say it looks a lot like Chrono Trigger, right down to the spiky haired protagonist. Chrono Trigger is a better game by a mile, but to be fair, not many RPGs of this era can hold a candle to that one. I did see an article with the headline asking if Terranigma is Europe's Chrono Trigger. I would say that might be the stupidest thing I've ever read, since Chrono Trigger is Europe's Chrono Trigger, as it was released there, and that game would fuck Terranigma up in the most embarrassing street fight of all time. But still, I digress. I'll also say the combat squeaks by with a positive endorsement, but just barely. The later portions of this game also make me hate it, but if you've got the ability to cheat through this one as I did, using like a Game Genie code to make myself invincible and raise my stats in the last 2 hours of the game, it's tolerable. I know that's not even cool to do, but I'm a 41-year-old man and I don't have time for this game's bullshit. The combat is very basic, but if you happen to play Illusion of Gaia or old school Zelda and you enjoyed that, you will be able to get into this one. The only thing that kind of sucks is magic. It seems totally worthless, so don't even bother unless it's required of you. Another thing I really like here is the map and how you are able to traverse the world. At first you are just on foot and the world is mode 7 as hell, and it looks great if you like this graphical style. Later you will acquire a ship to sail the high seas, and even later you'll get an airship that was built by a nerdy kid. I love that cliche in these old games, like Luca in Chrono Trigger, who can just build time machines and shit, and she's like 12. Just because these kids are smart doesn't mean they have resources or funding to make this crazy shit. I don't even know how that works. It doesn't matter, because this kid built an airship and he just gives it to me, so I don't give a shit how he made it work. The only hitch is you can only land your boat at docks and you can only land your airship on runways, so it's not like you have complete access to everything you want to go to. You'll still have to hike on foot for most things, but since there are no random battles, it's not that crazy. Finally, I'll just talk about the writing and the English translation. It's horrible, and I can't really imagine it being any other way. I enjoyed the rush job they did on this. It makes the story convoluted and difficult to follow, but it also leads to interactions like this one with this bird. What the hell is this dude talking about? It just says a bunch of random stuff about animals, and then says nobody cares about art anymore. I don't know if this is the translation or if the game is just prone to be cliche as hell, but I also love this scientist here who tells you how smart he is and that he's a scientist. Then he shows you a bunch of zombified corpses floating in a vat and tells you how beautiful it is. Why do games and movies always do that? By the way, like some twisted scientist that makes something gross and then tells someone it's beautiful. Like, yeah, if that's so beautiful, like, just take it out of that vat and have sex with it in front of me then and prove to me how beautiful you think it is, because we're both looking at it and we both know that that thing is absolutely disgusting. What the fuck is wrong with you?
Oh, look, beautiful, beautiful little baby. Look,
The writing for the Asian towns you visit too, like Yungkao, and I don't know how to pronounce that because I'm super white, but it's on the screen. Anyway, these towns are full of hilariously racist writing, and even when this game came out, this would have been questionable as far as acceptability goes. Still, it's a fun snapshot of the times and something you'll never see in video games again unless they are intentionally trying to be offensive. And finally, we have the ending, which I really liked, and it had a lot of balls for a game of the time, which involved baby killing and your entire underworld being destroyed so that the surface world can survive. The protagonist, in my case, Piss, is notified that he gets one last day to enjoy his life, and then he's murdered. Pretty bleak stuff and pretty unexpected. I like it, and yeah, spoiler alert for a 30-year-old game. And onto the bad, which is always so much more fun to talk about than the good and why I saved it for last. The absolute biggest problem I have with Terranigma is how vague the objectives are, and unless it's something that was accidentally lost in the translation, which I don't think is the case, I'm almost positive that this was done intentionally to artificially drag out the runtime, and it can be insanely frustrating. There are so many times in this game where you will have to consult a guide as to what you're supposed to be doing, and every single time you will think to yourself, how in the absolute fuck was I supposed to know that or even figure that out? If I were playing this as a kid without a guide, I'm not sure I could have even gotten past the intro sequence where you had to throw pots at the door. The solution was so obscure, I'm not sure I could have figured that out. And there are numerous occasions in this game where things like that happen. There are also locations on the map that you need to go to that are simply not marked. In fact, every location you need to go to that isn't a town or dock or a runway or something along those lines is simply not marked on the map at all. So you essentially need to just traverse every inch of the map, and every once in a while you'll hit a new location that you need to go to that you had no idea existed. And for the last time, I'll say I understand this is a product of its time, but it's not something I'm so willing to forgive. There's no way these developers did not know what they were doing. So even though shit like this ran rampant through a lot of RPGs, that still doesn't make it acceptable. There's also a stealth sequence at Dragoon Castle where it wants to be Metal Gear Solid so bad, but actually turns this game into something much worse. There are 2 times I quit playing this game and was convinced I'm going to negatively review it without completing it. Luckily, I returned to the game both times after remembering I can cheat and actually finished it, but this is one of those times. This stealth section right here that you are looking at is one of the worst things ever made by humans, and the developers should be ashamed of themselves that they ever put this in the game. And again, I think this was done to artificially lengthen the game because this is almost impossible to finish without cheating. Every one of these guards you need to pass and not get spotted by do not have any set patterns that you can learn and adapt to. This is all completely random, so whether or not you can complete this section is all up to chance, and that is just not acceptable. The only reason I came back to the game after rage quitting is because I remembered on my FX Pack Pro, which is basically an EverDrive or a flash cart for my Super Nintendo, it has save states. If none of that makes sense to you, it doesn't matter. Every time I approached a guard in this section, I would save state it, then if I failed, I would reload that section again. I was able to get through it like this, but I shouldn't have to resort to this. If you decide to play this game, hopefully you have the right setup where you can do the same thing, like playing on an emulator or on a flash cart on a real Super Nintendo like me. Otherwise, expect endless hours of misery trying to complete this section of the game, because when you get spotted by any guard, it sends you right back to the very beginning to do it all over again. It is so infuriating. The other serious issue I have with Terranigma is the insane difficulty spike about 80% through the game. You'll know you've reached that point when you are confronted by Bloody Mary's 4 demon minions that circle you in a dungeon, then come to a stop, giving you a chance to hit one of them. If you pick the right one, you will do damage. If you hit the wrong one, they will damage you. The problem here is, just like the stealth mission I just talked about, if you can remember that far back, is that whether or not you hit an imposter or the real demon is all completely at random without any indication which is the right one to hit. So you can be dealing with these sluts for 10 seconds if all goes well, or 30 minutes if it doesn't, which is what happened to me the first time I encountered them, and I was super confused and convinced I was missing the objective. I wasn't. That's just how this sequence plays out. You are either lucky or you're not, and you got a 1 in 4 chance of hitting the right one. This section can also use up every single one of your health potions if you keep missing the right one, which again is what happened to me, and which is what cannot happen to you if you expect to beat Bloody Mary, who you fight directly after this. You need every potion you have in order to get through her. Now, Bloody Mary is a boss who is 5,000% more difficult than anything you've ever faced in your life and in this game. I did not end up needing to cheat to beat her. I used a guide and found out I needed to use a magic ring to defeat her, but even then, it was still insanely difficult, even after using as many rings as I could. I was stuck on her for hours, and it was incredibly frustrating. It is at this point the guide I used tells me that I should grind to level 30 or so. And seeing as how I was at like level 22, I disagreed with that guide because I'm not going to grind for 6 hours to get up to that. It takes a long time to level up in this game. Even after completing it, I still wasn't at level 30 to put that into perspective. And even Bloody Mary isn't the worst offender here. There's an even worse boss you fight after her in a factory, and everything about this factory is absolute garbage, which again, without the use of a guide, I never would have been able to complete this. When you first enter, obviously the lights are off, so the game gives you a generous 1 inch of light around your character, and you're just wandering around aimlessly in the dark wondering what the hell you gotta do. I don't even know where that 1 inch of light came from anyway, like why did they even give you that, but fuck it, who cares? Well, it turns out you just gotta walk around blindly forever until you run into a random thing that doesn't even look like a light switch that you need to interact with to turn the lights on. First off, I never would have known this was something I had to interact with, and second off, why did this even need to be here? There was no benefit to the game by adding this lights off nonsense. It just wasted my time, which this game loves doing. But once you figure that out, the fun continues. Now you've got to crawl through tunnels that I had no idea were tunnels I could crawl through until I consulted the walkthrough after running around in circles seemingly forever because the game goes out of its way to disguise these tunnels as just scenery. Once you figure that out, which you won't, you then need to use these hubs to teleport around the stage. Problem is, there's no indication whatsoever that these are teleporters that you use to teleport around. They appear to just be a part of the stage as you walk around them. Are you noticing a common theme here? You only find out that they are teleporters if you actually jump into the front of them, which I never thought about doing. Like, why wasn't it made more clear that these are things I need to jump into? Why do I need a guide to tell me that? It's pretty stupid and it's infuriating. Finally, after getting to the end of the stage, you fight a giant robot which will mop the entire floor with your hot little body with little to no effort. This is the game telling you that it wants you to be at like level 50 here, and I was only at level 24, and this is what I decided I am done with this game. First and foremost, if the game designers want me to be at level 50 for this fight, please design the game in a way where if I play it reasonably and kill the monsters I encounter while I get to this point, that I am pretty close to where I need to be strength-wise in order to take this thing on. It's horrible game design that I should be less than half as powerful as I need to be when I reach this point, seeing as how I've gone out of my way to kill everything I've run across the entire game. So why am I all of a sudden so underpowered? Because before Bloody Mary, I didn't die a single time in 14 hours. The developers are up to their old dirty tricks again, trying to artificially lengthen the game, and that's not okay, especially when it's this frustrating. After taking a break and thinking I quit Terranigma forever, the next day I remembered that I could apply Game Genie codes to the game with my flash card, so I looked online and found some codes, and then proceeded to cheat my ass off, and you should too. I was worried that these codes wouldn't work with my patched ROM, but they did, surprisingly. I refused to play into this little, now level up for 10 hours to finish the game agenda Terranigma tried to push onto me at the very end of it, so that's how you get it done. This game was a total cakewalk up until Bloody Mary, and it was very enjoyable. I didn't die a single time upon reaching her, then all of a sudden the game was nearly impossible with this garbage, and add in the stealth mission right before it that you won't die at, but you will fail repeatedly for hours without save states, and that godforsaken factory stage after Bloody Mary, like goddamn. The bottom line is that I could have done without the last couple hours of this game, but listen, just cheat and it's not so bad. It's a good life lesson that can be applied to every facet of your life, not just this game. And despite these gripes, overall, I really enjoyed this one. I just wish I knew some of the things I know now when I first went into it. There's a lot of good here, and up until reaching Bloody Mary, and despite the vagueness of basically everything, if you use a guide to progress through the game and don't think too far into it, you can have a good time here. I just kinda wish I knew exactly what kind of bullshit this game was up to before I played it, so I knew to just keep the walkthrough up and consult it at every turn. I tried to complete as much of it as I could on my own, and that is a mistake. Do not do that. Just keep a guide open and follow it at every turn, and you can have a lot of fun with this. And then when you reach the stealth sections and Bloody Mary, just cheat your ass off and see your way to the end. This is not Europe's Chrono Trigger at all, but it is a decent RPG, and if you like the games from this era, you will probably like this.
I liked this game a lot at the very beginning, and at the very end, I hated it a lot, until I realized I could cheat my way through it. If you can do that, play this one, man. It's pretty fun. It's not a bad game at all. And it's, I would almost say it's like a hidden gem on the Super Nintendo, since we didn't get this in North America. But if you aren't prepared for the bullshit, you don't want to do the work, or if you don't want to cheat through it, this game's gonna piss you off. Don't even bother, man, because it's gonna suck ass. Anyway, thanks for watching this, guys. I always love you. We'll see you on the next video.